Lumpur to Beijing. There was 239 souls on board, including passengers and crew. The plane took off normally and climbed to a cruising altitude. About 40 minutes into the flight, it lost contact with air traffic control. So, a plane is constantly talking on the radio to air traffic control. The pilots are. So that's what they're talking about there. And then, all of a sudden, they lost contact. And air traffic control also has a radar where they can see the planes. And they were not able to see the plane anymore. Which, if it had crashed, usually would still be on the radar. So, that's the beginning of why there's some concern about what happened to this flight, because plane crashes happen all the time, and they don't disappear. Even when they're over the ocean, they don't just disappear. They're still seen. Usually you can still hear the pilots calling Mayday, Mayday, emergency. None of that took place. Its transporter, which sends location data, was manually turned off. So that kind of feeds into the conspiracy of, was the plane overtaken? Were there, were there people on board that were involved? What happened? Military radar later showed the plane turned around and flew back across Malaysia. But at this point, when they were doing this, they did not have any contact with air traffic control, and their location data was turned off, so no one knew that happened. Let's look at satellite data. Even after losing radar contact, the plane still continued to send automatic handshake signals to a satellite for several hours. These signals suggested that the plane flew for about 6 to 7 more hours. Analysis conducted, it likely traveled into the south, into the remote Indian Ocean. This path is often called Southern Corridor. This means that the plane did not crash right away, and it flew for hours with no communication. So what happened to it? One of the largest and most expensive searches in history followed, and I'm filming this in March of 2026, and recently they just did another search, and they found nothing, and this is now 10 years, 11 years later, almost 12, and they still are searching, spending millions of dollars, and found nothing. Multiple countries participated in the search, including Australia, the US, and China. Search efforts focused on the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote places on Earth. Despite years of searching, the main wreckage has never been found. They found some parts of a plane, but they've never been able to confirm that they were parts of the Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. I remember telling my parents about this, and they kind of were like, yeah, like they found the plane. People just don't want to admit that they found it because it's more fun that there's like a conspiracy. But I've done my research, and they cannot prove that this is parts of those planes, and the fact that the government is still spending millions of dollars searching for this plane proves that they never found it. So we're going to talk about the debris discoveries. Some pieces believed to be from MH370 were later found. In 2015, a wing part washed up on Ruvian Island. Additional debris were found along African coastlines. These confirmed the plane likely crashed in the Indian Ocean, but didn't reveal the full story. And now I'm going to go into some theories about what happened. Deliberate action. Someone, possibly the pilot, intentionally diverted the plane. I do not believe this to be true because the family members of the pilots conducted many background checks on them. They were interviewed many times, and it does not seem likely that the pilots were terrorists of some sort, or that they had plans to do that. I don't personally believe that theory, but that is one, so I want to mention it. The controlled turn and long flight paths support this theory. I think that someone obviously who knew what they were doing flew the plane for the 6 to 7 this has happened before, and there's actually a movie about this, when a loss of oxygen causes everyone on the plane to fall asleep, to pass out, and there's nothing anyone can do to wake you up, and then there's no one flying the plane. However, the plane turned around, they wouldn't have, if this happened, it would have been so sudden. So that doesn't line up with the manually turning off the radar, because it would have happened so suddenly, it doesn't make sense that it would do that. And also, planes don't turn off the radar when they're flying, and that doesn't happen. And so that theory is that everyone on board became unconscious, but that doesn't regard the plane turning around or anything like that. The next theory, which I believe to be true, is hijacking. This was considered early on, but there's no evidence of terrorist involvement. And also, they looked at all the passengers on the flight, and it was a complete mix of like Americans. There were some, I think there were 2 people from the UK. There were a lot of people that were from India, but there was no like set amount of people that it's like, oh, this is a terrorist going after Americans, or this is a terrorist going after the UK. There was just such a mix of people that theory of that it was a terrorist act doesn't really make sense. And then there is an aliens theory, but I won't get too much into that. So why is it still a mystery? Because no distress signal was ever sent. The key tracking systems were turned off, and the crash location is an extremely remote ocean area. That's all the information I'm going to be giving away today, but it's a really interesting accident, and it's one of those things that I'm like, when I believe in God, and when I get to heaven, I'm so excited